Welcome, members, to the Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As a council, we welcome the use of Welsh language within our public meetings, but I've not received any requests to use Welsh today, so the meeting will be conducted in English only. Please remember, this meeting is being webcast, therefore can you turn off or silence your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into your microphone. For information, in case of a fire drill, please follow the signs to exit the building. Can I also remind members to sign the attendance register that's circulating, and have there been any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Chris too.
Lovely, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest to declare, members? No? Okay. On to agenda item number 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of October 2018. Seems a very long time ago. To remind members, these minutes relate to the meeting we had to scrutinise highways maintenance. Members, I'm assuming you've scanned through the minutes for accuracy. Can you please confirm they are an accurate member? Stuart?
Yeah.
Yeah? Everybody agree?
Yeah.
So, moving on to the action sheet, the recommendations were sent to the Chief Officer and the Executive Member for responses. You have all had a copy of the responses via email that Rachel Jarrett and Fiona Cross, Councillor Cross, has come along today to answer any questions, because I understand you do have a couple of questions based on those responses. Can I just remind members that any questions you do have must relate to those responses. It's not an opportunity for you to reopen the debate. Okay, thank you.
I'd like to welcome you both to the meeting. Members, you've had the list of the answers to our recommendations on the highway maintenance that we scrutinised in October. I know that there are a couple of questions that you'd like to pose, so over to you, members.
Wrong button. Is it possible just to say a few words before they start?
We are very limited on time. We have two big, huge agenda items today.
That's fine.
So I'm mindful that we've literally got a few minutes to deal with this, and I'd rather members have the opportunity to ask their questions, and if we have time, that would be great. Thank you. Members?
Thanks. Thank you very much, Chair. I've only got a couple of queries, really, about the ones that were rejected. For recommendation 2, I would like to sort of state for the record, obviously, there was no sort of hint or suggestion of any sort of impropriety going on at all. The reason that we sort of suggested that maybe it should be a subject for audit was, well, we were tossing up between whether it would be good to have a task and finish group or whether perhaps audit would be the more appropriate, and we ended up settling on audit, because we did feel that there were weaknesses in the way that the maintenance service was being delivered, and we didn't feel confident that the risks associated with failing that service were being adequately met. So basically that's just my comment on that.
Yeah. I think, Councillor, thank you for that. I think that's reassuring. I think there was some concern when the recommendation came through about was there anything that was sort of, because normally a referral is to audit is in light of anything fraudulent being undertaken, which was the view taken. So this was the view from the Assistant Chief Executive Resources. I also think, and this is something because of the nature of the response, I think it's important, we did take the response of the committee and the view of the committee very seriously. Both Councillor Cross and myself watched the committee afterwards. And in light of the recommendations, we actually approached the Institute of Civil Engineers to and asked them to peer review the HAMP. in light of this, and they were unable to do that themselves, but they recommended that Swansea Council, recommending that their highways officer they felt as best practice within Wales. Swansea Council have undertaken a peer review of our highways asset management plan, and that's why we wanted to come to you today. And actually their view was that they felt it was a good document. They felt it was in line with most. There are areas where we have changed it, which were recommendations from the committee, but their view was that the recommendations were that they gave it a clean bill of health.
In addition to that, they liked the succinct format and intend to carry that forward themselves, which I think is a compliment in itself. So, but that's the adjustments that you obviously haven't seen yet.
Councillor Sloan?
The other recommendation that was rejected was it 5? Yeah. 5. The response to recommendation 5 was that condition survey was not possible to collect over the entire network, citing reasons including traffic calming, for example. That's sorry, but that isn't true. There's no other way to say it. And I do have evidence to back me up, because there's a document that I managed to find yesterday. It's a specification for scanner surveys, which is the driven survey, and it specifically says in there that they can survey them, and what they would do, generally, where there is traffic calming, speed bumps in particular, is they would just note the locations of them, so that anyone looking at the data after and would see an anomaly would be able to know that that anomaly was caused by the speed up. But it wouldn't invalidate the rest of the data. And I just wondered how we were coping, because we do this survey on our C roads, and several of which, just to run off the top of my head, Greenmeadow Way, Lanlown Way, Woodland Road, Llewellyn Road, and the town centre one-way system all have traffic calming features on them. And presumably they are being surveyed. So I'm just a little bit baffled about why the potential for a linked-up database, you reject that suggestion based on a falsehood, really.
I appreciate your comments there. This was an area where I was very intrigued myself, so I've actually been out with one of our highways officers and tried to assess the varying degrees of issues with our roads, but also those sort of challenges. One of the things he fed back to me is that it's not just about that example of speed bumps, but it's also parked cars on the sides of roads, which is something that we have a lot of within our little areas, and that it wouldn't necessarily happen just once either. In order to get a full data set to make an informed decision, it would have to be done maybe 4 times a year. I can only go by my own experts, and I trust those experts that are not misleading me in any way. But yeah, so that was one of the points. But in addition, it isn't just that. It's the fact that other councils, with slight moderations, do the same process as ours. Because we've gone out to other councils to ask, what do? Do they use these electronic forms of collecting the data? Right. And if we can't gather it all together, then it's not going to be holistic in the sense of making an informed choice.
Sorry, I perhaps didn't mention. It actually says deviations caused by lengths of parked vehicles where the normal traffic flow would be around these vehicles would not normally require recording. And again, they would just note where those locations were. It wouldn't stop them surveying the road. But I don't see why that would sort of prevent, or why it would make the idea of a linked-up electronic database any more attractive. I mean, I can't believe in this day and age we are suggesting that we stick with paper-based system and fill in sort of these large files. I just find that unbelievable. Because, and I find it unbelievable because the main reason being, in 1996 when I worked for Gwent County Council, we had exactly this system, and that was 22 years ago. So I just think, I can't believe how far backwards we've ended up over the period when technology has improved so vastly. It's just a mystery.
I was one of the other ones that asked about this, and I've seen in Cardiff, to be honest, because we were looking at other aspects of neighbourhood type work down there, and they were using iPhones and reporting systems using electronic.
Yeah.
And it's what you said, and I've seen evidence of it as well. It struck me when we were having a conversation. It wasn't just Alan on this, it was the rest of us on this.
Yeah.
The rest of the council uses electronic systems. What are we doing using paper systems? And bearing in mind we're talking technical professional stuff, I totally agree with Alan. I can't understand at all why we're using this. And there are evidences, his evidence, and we've seen it in other places, where technical, it seems very old-fashioned and very inefficient. Bearing in mind we're talking about professional officers going straight from being in the field through to using, without having to use clerical or whatever. And we appreciate the work that clerical officers do in your department, but it does seem, from a professional point of view, which is what we're talking about, this is, this is very old-fashioned. Now, I know people are comfortable with paper systems, but that's not the same as what there is out there. Plus the fact Alan's also drawn our attention to the fact there is Welsh government systems that work in this as well. Now, what we should be doing is actually working towards it. Now, if you'd offered that there, that would have been, what are the hopes of seeing?
We're always going to be looking for the best forms of doing this. This is what we're seeing at the moment, but I think it's not so much as to focus on the actual paper element, it's to focus on the skills behind it. There are decades of experience within our officers. When they're going out on the street, they've been doing this, they know their roads, they know the condition of them, they're monitoring them several times throughout the year in order to be able to come up with this data. And that is valuable, I believe. And so, it's a case of seeing how technology moves on, but yeah.
Okay, can I also maybe propose almost an amendment to this? This response has not come from the officers, it's come from our current scanner provider. Yeah. That wasn't made clear in this. Now, the providers for the scanning service isn't just procured by us, it's done on all Wales level, and it is done in conjunction with Welsh Government. I think the officers said that last time in terms of the whole highways asset management plan, in terms of the data that is collected on an all Wales level. I remember when I was at WLJ days, because I was involved in the first HAMP and the procurement of a scanner provider, that some of the unclassified and the sort of like more residential areas were not included in that procurement. What we can do to amend maybe this is say when the procurement comes up again, because this has come from our scanner provider currently, is that we look to include that in the specification to get as an option in terms of cost, because this will also come at a cost. Digital systems, it might, the cost might be a digital system when we have less officers. And that's that sort of conversation which we can then do that and amend our recommendation to say that when the procurement comes back up, this will be re-looked at and recosted in terms of the best way forward. Does that seem reasonable?
That's what we did now.
Are you happy with that, members? Yeah.
I also add, because you've got some wonderful experience in that, we know that, and you've got, and they're not getting any younger. They're amazing officers you've got there. We'd like to say that. And that kind of knowledge level, I mean, you're well aware of that. It's irreplaceable. It needs to go somewhere.
Sorry, it was just one last thing. It's just a quick one. It's really to be considered. Maintenance of all roads should be done to the standard of the road was originally built and categorised as, not to a level it may have been reclassified to. And this doesn't account for a lot other than that, I would have thought. Newport Road in my ward is one I have in mind, because it was originally a trunk road. So it was built to withstand the rigours of trunk road traffic. Obviously since then, we've got Cumberland Drive on the one hand, and we've got Lantana Bypass on the other. So that road is a lot quieter now. But what we were suggesting was that if say a utility company comes in to dig a trench and do something with their apparatus, when it comes to reinstating that road, they should reinstate it as they found it, rather than reinstate it as it is now, which is a relatively quiet road. Because that would mean, if they did that, it would mean a weaker construction currently that's there. You see what I'm saying? Now, there's no cost to the council for this, mind, because there would never be a circumstance where we remove more than just the surfacing layers. unless we become flush with money and we start reconstructing everywhere, but I can't see that in a million years, to be honest. So I don't understand why it's still to be considered. To me, it's a bit of a no-brainer.
That's not, in relation to that part, that's not what it's referring to. Yeah, you're right, if a utility comes in and has to do any work, they should put it back as it was, and that's what we would push them to do if it wasn't the case. So that's not to be considered in that sense. That would be a given, but we'd need to know that they hadn't put it back the way that it was in the first place. So that would be one part of it.
I think that when we read the recommendation, it didn't refer to street works. So that's why there's two parts, and so it says maintenance of all roads should be done to the standard the road was originally built to.
It's quite general.
So when we we were reviewing, and obviously we did go through and with officers, and that's why we referred to the street works element, where we say that it's reinstated to ensure construction integrity is not compromised. That's the current discussion that is undergone with undertakers. So it's not, it was an A road, so take it back. It's to where it was, and you have that conversation with undertakers now. And it's a bit of a negotiation with undertakers, as I'm sure you can appreciate. Well, they do try to sometimes do it to a lesser standard, and we don't want that to happen. We want the road integrity and safety not to be compromised when we have street works undertaken. And we're currently having it, and that's why we have street works inspectors out there to make sure that contractors are doing exactly what they should be doing to keep the integrity and safety of our road network along to the standards that we want. We also put in that additional paragraph, though, because again, is that if maintenance should be originally built to, well, actually we have to recognise that our road network is a lot busier than some one of our roads, and we want to ensure that it is future-proofed as well. And so we did put, and that's why it was in the to be considered, because of the wider aspects of the network management perspective from the recommendation.
There is no conversation with the utility company. The authority can demand that it's put back. Because once again, it's in the specification for reinstating highways. So it's not a conversation, it's you will do this. If you suspect that they haven't done that, a simple call, which you can make them pay for, will establish exactly what they've done. So again, I don't see...
I think aligned to that, we are having current conversations, because when they roll out a digital broadband, for example, there is a new Streetworks Code of Practice endorsed by Department of Transport and DCMS, which is potentially, it's a discussion at the moment, because they actually want to try and lessen the standards that broadband contractors have to put the road condition back to enable the rollout of broadband, particularly to rural communities, quicker and sooner, because of the lack of the white areas around Britain and the sort of economic development. So there are areas, particularly broadband, where the contractors are trying to lessen the standards of the streetworks legislation and have government buy-in to do so. So that's why there is variation of those conversations, and there is negotiation sometimes, particularly with the broadband contractors.
Sorry about this. But those conversations are not on a local level. Those conversations are on a Department of Transport level. Because I know I represented the Welsh Association of Technical Officers on several of those meetings at the Department of Transport, looking at the best practice guide for streetworks back in the day. So, I mean, the utility companies are going to demand all sorts of things, but the highway authorities are certainly not going to let them put back a weaker structure that is currently there. It's just never going to happen. Because, I mean, the Transport Research Laboratory would certainly not support any move to sort of weaken the highway. I mean, why would they?
Just to reassure you, we know our powers. We know that if they don't put it to the standard that it should be, we know what we can do, and we would do. And we do have inspectors going out and checking, but if anybody's concerned that a road hasn't been put back the way that it should, you've got my email. Okay?
Members, you happy with that? Thank you very much for attending. I think we need to move on very quickly. Thank you. Thank you, members. We'll go on to agenda item 5, community safety. The purpose of this report is for the committee to consider what progress has been made in relation to the Wales Audit Office proposals for improvements for the delivery of community safety. I'd like to welcome Jason White, Gwent Police representative, to the meeting. I'd like also to welcome Rebecca Haycott. I know that you're here for the second item on the agenda, and also to Lyndon Puddy, one of our chief officers, and Kate Williams. Welcome. So I'd like to ask Lyndon or Kate to... Lyndon, I'm assuming, to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to give a very brief overview, and then I'm going to pass over to Kate and Jason to take members through the report. Members, you'll see on page 1 around the report summary the fact that the Wales Audit Office has done a list of recommendations, one of which is to establish community safety partnerships boards, whichever way we consider that. Part of this report is addressing some of those issues that in Gwent that's been approached on a regional footprint, because members may recall when the public service boards were established, and prior to that the local service boards, we were encouraged to bring the partnerships under one umbrella. So community safety came under the local service board, and we didn't have a bespoke community safety board following that process. Not all councils have adopted the same process, but that was what was adopted here some considerable time ago. So community safety comes under the auspices of the PSB for the strategic responsibility around that, but we are discharging a lot of the functionality and a lot of the activity on a regional footprint, because a lot of the issues that happen across Gwent, and Kate will go through this in more detail with you, are similar in nature in some authorities and different in others, but we're trying to adopt a consistent approach to how we tackle community safety on both the local and the regional footprint. So I'm going to leave it at that, if that's okay with you, Chair, and pass over to my colleagues to take you through the report.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. As Lyndon said, the background for the Wales Audit Office report was commissioned in 2016 by the Auditor General, and wanted to look at how Welsh Government, the Police and Crime Commissioner and local authorities were working together to ensure that they were being effective to tackle crime and other public safety issues. So the report really goes into some of the detail on what the community safety team within Torfaen and locally within Gwent are doing to try and address those recommendations. The recommendations, just for your reference, are on page 35. Yep. So, a lot of the issues that came up there was around improved strategic partnership working, sharing best practice. There's a lot of recommendations that were given, and it was really for the partnerships, the community safety partnerships, public service boards, to see how would we go about kind of delivering on those. I'm currently the chair of the Safer Gwent Partnership Board. So we've been doing a lot of work over the last year or two, really, to look at the governance of Safer Gwent. As Lyndon said, the Community Safety Partnership within Torfaen is delivered under the Public Service Board. It's quite different across the 5 Gwent local authorities. So we wanted the Safer Gwent Partnership Board to act as the regional partnership across Gwent, so that we didn't have to have 5 separate Community Safety Partnership Boards. I met with Welsh Government and the Home Office to discuss how we could go forward legally on doing this, and it's just quite clear that the legal responsibility for community safety will always lie within the Public Service Boards, but actually regionally we are able then to report on a regional level of community safety, but ensuring then that local delivery isn't lost, because I think that was a bit of a concern from lots of those around the table, Safer Gwent, that if we're just doing this regionally, how actually are we going to do local delivery? So, as some of you know, we've got the Community Safety Hub, which was another item that members wanted to kind of discuss and maybe ask some questions around today. So we're based in the police station. So the local community safety delivery is delivered by a team there, and we work in partnership with other agencies across the road. Within the report as well, it was asked to look at specific community safety issues. So I know Jason's here that we can kind of go through that if there were any sort of specific issues. And also really to look at how community safety is managed strategically. And as Lyndon said, it's done through the PSB, but we're always looking at other ways that we can kind of sort of improve and do this. One of the elements of that is Objective 7 of the Wellbeing of Future Generations assessment that has come out in that. So that is for safe and cohesive communities. So there is a specific objective under that the team and there's a subgroup to be able to look at that to feed directly then into the PSB. So we're making sure that we're looking at that strategically. Just see if there's anything else in there. Yeah, but that's it really. That's the general in the report. Thanks.
So members, I know we've got a number of questions. If you don't mind, I'll just start off. How do we engage and consult with the community? And on to that, how do we engage and consult with councillors in relation to?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Some of you may well be aware, many years ago we had something called PACT, Partners and Communities Together. The long and short of it was really effective in certain areas like Caerleon, where you had 40 to 50 people attending, and it was much more representative of the community. And then you had other wards where you'd have one or two. And then you end up deciding on priorities that weren't necessarily the priorities for that area. So that was replaced by another engagement tool called Your Voice. Your Voice simply was a way in which CSOs would go out to the community, would consult in excess of 18,000 people per year, and they do it over a 2-month basis, and basically asking them what they believe the priorities to be in their ward area. When I came into post last year, I reviewed Your Voice because the feedback I was getting internally and externally that it wasn't necessarily effective and it wasn't really concentrating on the issues that needed to be concentrated on. Classic example is that we would canvass individuals about key issues in their area, and some would come back and say dog fouling as an example. Clearly the police wouldn't deal with that, but what we weren't particularly good at, not just in Torfaen but across Gwent, was then signposting that. So immediately those individuals who took the time, 10 minutes to fill out that survey, had no sort of feedback on that, which then affected confidence. So I did an internal and an external survey looking at public and internal sort of feedback, and I took the decision in September last year to suspend it, to look at an alternative and more meaningful way in which we can engage with the public. So it's still in draft form at the moment, and we're looking to go live the first week of the new financial year in April. But essentially what the new system is going to look like is that we will formulate, we will scan and we'll talk to our KINs, our councillors, our public through our surgeries, but also look at our local tasking and what is that telling us are the issues, for instance, in Torfaen. So that will give us a steer of what the issues are within the section. Once we've done that, we'll then identify what the issues are based on threat, risk, harm, vulnerability and organised crime, which is a real key emerging issue at the moment, not just in Torfaen but in Gwent as a whole. And then it's about engagement. So that engagement, what we're looking at doing is, I'm sitting down with the corporate comms department at the moment to get bespoke Facebook accounts for each section, so they can then become members of community groups. You know, there's Wherry, for instance, in mainly they've got 2,200 followers on there, and they also do polls. So the idea is that Phil O'Connell and his team for Torfaen will say, okay, we've identified 5 or 6 key priorities for Torfaen. What do you want us as the community to concentrate on? In addition to that, we will also obviously liaise with councillors, with our kins, do surgeries, but also those hard-to-reach groups as well. What we're currently doing in Gwent is formulating a demographic database based on protected characteristics on age, sex, race, religion, to ensure that their voice is heard as well, so they're consulted with. So we have an understanding really from those really hard-to-reach groups and communities. And once we've done that, and what is the real difference after we've done that, is then we problem solve, but not problem solve on our own, but we problem solve with partners, but more importantly, with the community. We've started investing heavily in problem solving policing at the moment. I know that members of the Hub in Torfaen and others have gone along to problem solving training days, who can then deliver training themselves. So the idea is that partners and police will all be trained in the what we call it the SARA model of problem solving. What we're looking to do then through social media is to get interested people from the community to actually become involved in that problem solving process, to actually manage and own the problem themselves and not be dictated to by police and partners, because ultimately priorities come and go, and at some point there's a tendency and a need for the police and partners to step away and for the communities to take ownership of their own issues so that we can then concentrate on perhaps more emerging trends. So it's quite radical, completely different to what we used to, but I think that's the best way forward if we're going to have meaningful engagement and activity.
Just to come back, I tend to agree with you on PACT was effective, but piecemeal, yeah. The Voice, I have the same opinion really, is that I don't think it necessarily worked. I'm very excited to hear about the new, and I look forward to that, because I think most councillors in the room are connected somehow to social media and groups and ward groups, and so to have our PCSOs or our officers being able to engage through that is it sounds excellent. So hot news here, members. I think that's.
I just think, just going back on that, I think just my commitment really is that it's currently out with the neighbourhood sergeants and the inspectors just to look at the process as it is. And once I've had feedback from that, it'll be a case then of pushing that out to obviously elected members, to the community, to get their opinions on it, with a go-live date, as I said, around the 1st of April.
Because I can only sort of give an example, like, Bronavon, they have set accounts that they, social media accounts, and I know that they interact an awful lot through that medium, and I think it's the way to go in a lot of cases. Sorry, Councillor Evans.
First element on that before I start. A lot of my residents are elderly, and they got nothing to do with social media, computers. They got a job to operate the phone. So what do we do for them?
The alternative to that is just not social media. You will still have surgeries ongoing in certain areas. You'll have KINs and other councillors who will be engaged with through the process too as well. So yes, I think we'd be cognizant of the fact that we are going into a technological age, but I'm mindful of an ever increasing demographic of elderly people, and we need to obviously engage with those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Jones.
Hi, I'd just like to ask, you were mentioning about stepping back and letting the community solve their own problems. Won't that cause a lot of problems with vigilantism and things like this?
When I say stepping back, obviously, first of all, they're part of that problem-solving process with police and partners. We're not obviously going to abandon the community and let them fend for themselves. We will only step away when we believe that that problem has been solved, or pretty much that we've got things in place, processes, so that, again, the community can take that on. But no, we certainly won't be abandoned. And with regards to vigilantism, do we really have cases of that at the moment? And again, it comes down to confidence, doesn't it? If they've got the confidence in the police and partners, then they'll report that.
Thanks for that. No, I agree we don't have vigilantism at the moment, but I do know we sort of step back more and more and let people help to solve crimes and things, and then often not get the feedback whether the crime has been solved. And I just think perhaps it is a little bit dangerous to step back quite a bit, you know, because policing is a very technical thing, isn't it, with lots of different edges to it.
Well, obviously there'll still be contacts, so the individuals within the community, you know, the SPOC in that community will still have contacts with the local ward officer, the local CSO and the sergeant. So those all maintain that contact. But I have to stress, we are working in difficult times at the moment, hence the real shift in emphasis on threat, risk and harm. We haven't got the resources to deal with those incidents that perhaps we could deploy our resources elsewhere where they're best utilised. We're talking exploitation, modern day slavery, all of those which are quite complex. And of course, what we haven't mentioned so far is the online crime, which is causing us considerable pressures at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Powell, I think you need to come.
Yeah, thank you. Just around the last point, really, vigilantism, not so much, you know, attacks, but certainly in terms of legitimising groups. So, for example, we've recently had one in my ward where people were sort of set camp outside somebody's house for a week and, you know, threw things at the windows and, you know, terrorise them until the housing association moved them from the property. You know, so I want to be careful that we don't legitimise that sort of activity around the sort of members of community that would do that. But linking into that, just around the hub, so we have this, if we have a new system, how do you foresee that would work with the hub and the partnerships you already have? How would they link in?
Okay, just on your first point, I know we've had personal contact over similar issues with regards to sex offenders in the area. I think the beauty of getting involved in community groups on Facebook is that we can actually pick up on any tensions and then we can respond earlier as well, which I think is really key. Going on to your hubs, the intention is that police and partners will be trained in problem solving. So those identified priorities for Torvine will obviously be discussed at a fortnightly tasking meeting. Because perhaps the police aren't necessarily the best placed to own that particular issue, whereas fire or the RSLs, you know, Bronavon may well be better suited to deal with that, or if nothing else from a sustainability point of view, it's about sharing that responsibility. So, and again, the whole onus of the hubs is that the police feed into it, but everybody else is encouraged to feed into it as well. And it's very much about identifying vulnerability and demand and then problem solving that at the hub.
Can I just ask, sorry Jessica, the community hub meetings, are there any councillor representatives on there? Because I know years ago some councillors used to be invited to them, and I think we're missing a trick if there isn't some sort of, is there a plan maybe to involve, I know it would be difficult to have multiple, but either a cabinet member or even somebody from the safety community, committee.
The meetings themselves are held under Section 115 of the Crime Disorder Act, so they're closed meetings. So that allows for the free and open disclosure of confidential information. So within the hub arena, that isn't a possibility. But we're obviously, we're more than happy to then meet with members if they have any issues and they want to feedback those into us. Then we can take that. Or if it's the registered social landlord, they may well be bringing information also from members that are fed into the hub. If there is a particular issue, the team then would be more than happy to kind of meet with members. We've got officers in post that deal north and south, and an officer that deals with area-based issues. So those kind of information that we would really welcome members' information on, but not necessarily at the hub.
No, I'm the same ward as Jess, and you well know the problems we've got down there. But it's not all of that. What in a former existence was community councillor, but I still am a community councillor for 25 years, and we've seen these initiatives come in and out, and I must admit, in the end, at PAC, I sort of began to loathe that with a vengeance, because at the end of the day, these initiatives come in and out. The problem is getting people to engage, and with PAC, as you well said, ended up being car parking, and more car parking. For your officers, a capital waste of time, so much so that whole issue is going over somewhere else. The problem is, you either get an overindulgence of problems or underindulgence, and I mean, Northfield was a good example of that, really, where people now are quite keen on it. It's how you get people working with us to engage, because you haven't got the resources, and the council hasn't got the resources. We need to get people to take ownership of their problems, and that particular group and some of the other ones we've got now are a good example. The thing that gets people engaging is some resources there that can change patterns of behaviour, and I wonder how we do that.
Jason has sort of, has sort of explained.
I'm interested because it's how you get actors, i.e. people in the community, to feel that we've got good examples with local groups now doing it. You've got some views on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So PAT was meant to be partners and communities together, but it ended up being police and communities together. Through our fault, I think we went about it the long way many, many years ago in really getting the partners to buy in. Similarly, Your Voice. The issue with Your Voice is that we've got 136 wards in Gwent, and Your Voice was built around every ward having a priority. If you look at some of the wards in Monmouthshire, we're talking extremely low level, arguably non-police, so there was a lot of unnecessary time then spent on problem-solving issues that didn't necessarily, they could have been resolved probably over the course of a couple of days and weeks, not necessarily over months. So this is very much about concentrating on the key issues and priorities in Torfaen. We've got 24 wards in Torfaen. Do we necessarily need 24 priorities? Absolutely not. And I think in order for us to have buy-in from yourselves and the community, it's about getting across to you and explain to you what the key issues are based on threat, risk and harm and vulnerability. And we'll go on to organised crime in a minute. I had this conversation with members up in Bryan of Gwent today. If we think organised crime isn't upon us within Torfaen, then I think we're walking around with our eyes closed. It is very much here. Newport had 2 incidents 2 days ago where there were several stabbings. I think one in the Gare, one in Pill, and that was with organised groups from Liverpool and Birmingham. So they are down here and they are among us, and there's evidence, Kate, of them being in Torfaen as well. So I'm pretty sure if we get that message out, obviously to yourselves and the community, that unfortunately we're not going to be looking at dog fouling today, but we're going to be looking at an organised crime group that is settling upon us. I'm pretty sure, I think they know what they want for us to concentrate on. You're absolutely right. It is about getting the community engaged and involved. But the one thing we've never done, or what we're planning to do, is to actually get them involved in that problem-solving process, so they actually manage the problem. And that's key.
Part of it, then.
Absolutely.
Councillor Evans?
Where you said that having members on these particular committees, some of us actually sit on the fire authority, and some of us sit on the police. So it could be a way in for us to sit on these particular committees anyway.
Can I answer that, Chair? Because members have raised this question with me previously in Council, and I've always been consistent with the approach. The Section 115 is for partner agencies to discuss and provide the resources for a response. The intelligence members give us is part of that process. Members are not a part of the process of 115. And I've been consistent with that.
I think just add to that as well is that we're really keen to push the voluntary sector in this as well, to get them involved. So as you know, we've got quite a few crime prevention panels. I think we've got 14 more or less in Gwent at the moment. And of course it's about getting those involved. Clearly they can't sit on those meetings because of the information that's shared. So we're then looking at something outside of those hub meetings to feed into the crime prevention panels for them to actually go out in the communities and do a lot of the stuff that we're asking them to do.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Slade, you are next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the question. It's more a request, really. I'm a new councillor. I was only elected last year. Or was it the year before? Time flies, isn't it? And my sort of observation is this. You seem to have a hierarchy of whether you've got a regional board, if you like, under which is our local sort of Torfaen hub, if you like. Would it be possible to get a kind of family tree that we could just, have to sort of see what agencies are from the sort of high, the higher level, and what agencies form part of the hub, and then maybe we could easier identify the reporting sort of structures that we have. Does that make sense? Sort of.
That absolutely makes sense, because when we have taken this to Safer Grant, when we've discussed this with Welsh Government and the Home Office, there's so much that Safer Grant could do, but actually the reporting structures, they're not in place. So part of the process now is to make sure that the structures are in place and visually in place, so that people can look at it and say, right, Safer Grant sits here, the Criminal Justice Board here, the Fowler SB team, how do they all fit in together? Where do the local partnerships fit in? What else fits into the local partnerships? So all of that, is something that is being drafted now as a recommendation through Safer Gwent, and that will then be delivered to the 5 public service boards for their comments and approval as a way forward. So, and it was key, because I think a lot of people, even at Safer Gwent, around the table, struggled to think, well, where are we fitting into this? Is this our area? Where else feeds in this? Yeah. There's lots of people around that table that have lots of different hats on, feed into lots of different partnerships. Actually, are they the right representatives that feed into the health board, into fire, and all of those? So yeah, there will be a structure that comes out, and especially bespoke to Torfaen then, of what fits in with our hub, who fits into that. So that will be available. That is being drafted.
Could I just add something to that, Chair? It's really helpful observation, Councillor Slade, because we've for some time struggled in public service boards, because we get information coming from Welsh Government and national government around this is the partnership approach you should have. It doesn't come with a governance structure, so we are then around considering, and the Fowler SV you had similar issues around, well, where do we actually report? Because we need a governance structure around how we have I can't say the word now, but how we operate functionally, and that was part of we are the lead authority in Gwent to establish a hub. That was and I brought that to scrutiny on a previous occasion here. But it's how we manage our regional activity, importantly how that fits in with the structures and the reporting structures that give members confidence that it has an oversight somewhere. Hence why we're very keen to bring this back to scrutiny again, to ensure members that that activity is still going on, because I know it's a big concern for members.
And just if I could add to that, one of the things that we're clear about at Safer Gwent is that there will be an annual report that will be delivered. It will go to the PSBs. It can come to scrutiny across Gwent, exactly what is going on, what are the measures in there, what have we done to achieve those. So I think that's something that we just wanted to be clear, that we were showing the performance that has been made, if there's any objectives, that they'll be met, so that that's all clear, so that it's just transparent, so that it's easy to view as well.
To ask you a question while I put the two of them together. Propose that Safer Gwent partnerships provide each of the 5 PSB partners with an annual report. When will this be first presented to the PSB? And then the other part of this was, how will the annual report be filtered down to members? Have you answered that or not? Yeah, so that was a question.
If I could just jump in, the report will be delivered to the PSBs, and that's spring, summer, so that report will be going in, so that will outline all that. Just
of course, we're going to scrutinise you on that as well, separately, so I know, because we get involved in that.
That can only be helpful. So.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's that reporting mechanism, so that's been raised here as well, which is good.
Councillor Slade. Number 13.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. Looking at the sort of ward analysis of some, The figures for antisocial behaviour and public order, there seems to be something sort of strange happening with that, because antisocial behaviour seems to be going down, and public order offences have increased over 100%. So I just wonder, has there been a change in the kind of reporting mechanisms?
Yeah, sorry. In the body of the document there's an explanation, but effectively, yes. The other sort of offence type as well is injury without duty, and that's rocketed. And we're not talking of those three crime types rocketing just in Torfaen, but we're talking throughout Gwent, regionally and nationally as well, because of different counting rules in the way in which we record crime. So you'll see the Llantarnam ward, which isn't in there, but ASB is actually reduced by 50% in the Llantarnam ward. However, public order has gone up by 19%, I believe, or something like that, and shoplifting has gone down by 7%. So there are variations in the way that we now record. I alluded to earlier, was online crime. So we're talking online harassment, sexting, stalking, massive increases, but of course they're recorded simply as violence without injury, because there's no physical assault, but there's still a recording mechanism. So they've shot up, whilst at the same time ASB's gone down.
Yeah.
Okay. On to Councillor Thomas.
What is your, this is a supplementary, what is your capacity locally to act on that? I'm intrigued more than anything on that one. But, yeah, because that's something nationally, you've got the cybercrime unit. What's our capacity locally to act on that?
So locally, we, as we said, we've got the hubs well established in Torfaen for over 18 months now. So we very much focus on people and places. So from a vulnerability point of view, we look at vulnerable locations and individuals, repeat victims, but we also then look at your sort of perpetrators, your repeat offenders, your hotspot areas. So we're much more targeted than we've ever been, but using a partnership approach to that. So the capacity is spread out, but through a partnership angle. As I said before, sometimes we haven't got the skill or expertise to deal with it solely as a single agency, whereas relying on our agencies and partners, then we can do that and fulfil it.
It's a cybercrime one because there's a lot of fear of that, and certainly fear of people, the contact stuff as well, because we just wonder how we deal with that locally.
So I know the Chair, we've had, when I was the Torfaen inspector going back last year, there was an issue in Cwmbran, and we were prepared then to do presentations involving our police online investigative team, who deal with what we call COPS packages. So, but we also have Operation Make Safe, where we're looking at sort of child sexual exploitation and that. But interestingly, which I think is in the document, is that the Commissioner, we've just funded a significant bit of work for Torfaen starting this month for the next 12-month period, called Healthy Relationships. So it's something through an organisation in Caerphilly called Regenerate. We're looking to target in excess of 3,000 15 to 24-year-old children to look at healthy relationships. So talking about sexting, stalking, domestic abuse, how you refer the telltale signs, modern-day slavery, the effects of ASB. We've also introduced organised crime as is an emerging trend. The feedback which they did in Caerphilly last year was overwhelming. I think there are 2,500 people, but we engaged with all the comprehensive schools in Torfaen, all the training providers, anything upwards of 24 years of age as well. So it's about capturing that entire audience, and for me it's really money well spent.
There's a tremendous fear by the elderly of going online as well, because Steve said about it's not just that they can't do it, they're afraid of it. Is there any local work being done on that one as well?
There are, as an example, in Blaney Gwent recently this week, we've got an age network of 50 plus who are concerned about online crime and fraud. So Natalie Evans, who's our dedicated cybercrime officer, She's prepared some literature and is attending to along with the local team, to actually then educate, make people more aware of how to lock down their computers and stuff like that, to ensure that we try and minimise contact and then people then being victims. So that's very much, I would say this because I used to work in Torfaen. We've got a very proactive local policing team who we've got portfolios focusing very much on the elderly demographic as well.
Lyndon, did you want to come back in? Yeah?
Only on cybercrime, Jay, thank you very much for bringing me in. Just to let members know that I'm working with South Wales Police at the moment. There's a project called Operation Tarion, which is coming around this borough around about the early parts of March, and it's a 4-hour session with they bring the cyber security bus with them, but they want a large venue, so I'm currently working around trying to identify that with areas with the greatest number of footfall to engage with individuals and businesses over cybercrime prevention, how best people can act. So that's the early part of March. So I'm working with South Wales Police on that.
Councillor Thomas, I know you are the next question.
Thanks for that, Chair. I got 2 questions. I'd like to wrap into one, if that's all right. It's on 2.10. Membership of the hub is increasing due to the success of the hub. How has the success been assessed? And also, who else is taking up membership? Have any gaps in the memberships been identified?
First and foremost, I think the proof is in the pudding just how successful Torfaen is. This week we're going live rollout. The similar, what we got set up in Torfaen is what I've introduced in Caerphilly and Blaenau Gwent, and they're going live this week. Members and partners from those 2 areas have come along and sat in on our community safety group meetings and have been so impressed with the content and the detail and the structure that goes into that, but more importantly is the positive outcomes that come out of it, that they've gone back and decided to then set something similar up in their own local policing areas. Monmouth are also coming on board this month, and Newport, I believe, next month. And the idea is, and we were talking then much more strategically, is that each of the chairs, for want of a better word, then of the hubs, will then talk to each other on a more frequent basis to share best practice, good ideas. You know, we've got a bit of an issue with homelessness at the moment. You know, how long has homelessness been an issue in Newport? So it's about speaking to our counterparts in Newport, learning best practice, what partners have they involved in dealing with that. So it's very much having a holistic view of sharing that practice. So in terms of success, the fact that other people want to follow Torfaen's lead, I think, says something in itself.
Originally the hub, we were based over the road, and it was only a small office, and we were co-located with the Crime Disorder Reduction Officer for Gwent Police, and within weeks that made such a huge difference, just having that person in the team with us. The reduction in meetings, phone calls, and something that you wouldn't want to put in an email, actually you're just having those conversations, because actually the room itself, we had a data sharing agreement that everything within the room was under 115, so we could just have those open conversations. So we weren't always going to meetings, we didn't need to try to arrange anything. And since we've moved over to the police station and have a bigger office space, the partners that now come into that room that have the normal day-to-day conversations that they'll speak to, PC Sean Wigley, who's the cadre within the team, the registered social landlords will come in, they come to the hub meeting, but they want to stay on and work after the meetings. They have their own meetings aside to that. So I think the willingness of partners, they always turn up to meetings. We're not struggling with getting partners around the table because they're actually getting something from it themselves. And just, you said with partners that want to get on board, today we had an officer from the ambulance service that wanted to come, and that was hearing about the hub. Actually, can I come to this meeting? And we're very clear that the meeting is for the prevention and detection of crime, so it's not just a multi-agency sharing meeting for everything. But one of the issues that was discussed then were, as they called them, frequent flyers. So the ambulance service, the 999 calls that were had in the month was 90 for one person. They're ringing the police, they're ringing that. Actually, what are we going to do as a partnership then to alleviate that issue? Are there mental health needs? So somebody else around that table will say, oh, I know them, this is victim support, we can refer in. So there's all of those conversations that just this morning having that, as an example of just partners getting on board and just making those difference locally. And for that person that is constantly ringing in, there are other issues there that we look to address, and the partners around the table can just do that really quickly, which we weren't able to do before.
I think just to add to that, Councillor Thomas, we took a punt on this, thinking that it was going to be a good opportunity, and in fairness to our asset management team here, they provided me with a large enough room to be able to facilitate this action. What we've also done as well is that there are IT ports, IT kits, there's telephones, there's desks, and there's chairs. So there's no reason why partners shouldn't be coming to these multi-agency meetings. They can also stay on behind, as Kate mentioned. We got Wi-Fi, they log into the secure Wi-Fi, they work from our office in the day. So it's a great community hub facility there for our partners to really concentrate on the key issues of the day, because the amount of wasted time going before one meeting to another where you can actually talk to someone from across the desk is very difficult to manage in terms of what you actually, how can you actually measure that. But the outcome of it is that you tackle things earlier and you manage to prevent things, and that, I think, is the conceptual success of it, rather than being able to try to get it down into pounds and pence at the moment, although that's something I think we would want to look at in longer term. How can we get this independently evaluated? But that, again, is for further discussion.
Thank you for that, members. Are there any other burning questions? I know that we have another big agenda item. Councillor Thomas? Sorry, Councillor? I'd just like to ask, the hub sounds very good, but how is, your sort of figures on everyday sort of policing, like burglary and things? A personal example is I've had a family member who had a burglary to his person, and was told by the police, who were very good when they came to speak to us about it, that perhaps because of lack of numbers they wouldn't be able to perhaps go to another area of the country and arrest this person, that they knew who it was, and that seemed to be due to sort of lack of money and things, and it's left me feeling that perhaps in some areas the police aren't able to do their job because of the cuts and things like this.
No doubt, obviously, austerity is here and has been here for a while. In circumstances like that, we then ask the force in question to make those inquiries and arrests on our behalf. And once they are detained in their custody units, then we send officers up, essentially. Depending on the crime type, if it's a more serious crime, then more often than not, then we'll send officers up to make those arrests themselves, as opposed to rely on that neighbouring force or other forces, just being cognizant of demands. But with regards to crimes, daily crimes, we've got a process, and we've had a process in being for the last 8 to 10 years, where we have a daily management meeting, which discusses crimes, patterns, vulnerabilities, missing persons, and those updates are fed in every day from sergeants and inspectors for each of the 5 areas in the west of Gwent, so we can then pick up and focus on those vulnerabilities much earlier and target the resources where they're most required. And of course what then that feeds into is our weekly local tasking meeting, where we produce a document which then feeds into the fortnightly tasking meeting which takes place in the hub. So there are processes in place to pick things up on a daily basis, which feeds into weekly and fortnightly tasking.
Thank you for that. And do you think you're able to get back to victims and tell them the outcomes of these crimes?
Yeah, so one of my many portfolios is that we're looking, or I'm certainly looking at the victim strategy at the moment. For those of you not aware, in September last year, the Home Office published the new victim strategy, where 2 things were highlighted nationally, and certainly is the case in Gwent. One is compliance with the Victims Code of Practice, and that revolves around increased training and awareness of staff and officers to be aware of what exactly the Code of Practice entails, and secondly, having systems in place to capture those compliance. We have got systems in place under CARES, under our niche system, our crime recording system, where there are codes, they're inputted codes. So when we have contact with a victim, we input a code. So I, as a supervisor or a line manager, can then click on codes and can tell whether or not that victim has had that first contact and throughout. So there are measures in place that we can sort of capture if that victim is at a quality of service.
Okay. Thank you, members. Are there any? Yeah, of course, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. The report that was, Appendix 1, the Peak Ward's profile, this is the first time I've seen anything like this, and I found it quite valuable. I'm not saying it was without criticism, but who gets that? Who gets that on a regular basis? It's the first time I've seen anything like this.
So that's compiled by Louise Appley, who is funded by the Commissioner's Office, and she provides all the paperwork in relation to Safer Gwent. So she does the annual strategic assessment document, but she also sort of works for me in relation to documents such as that. So I will task her with producing documents for off-road biking as an instance, for domestic abuse, whatever the crime type is or incident. Those come out on a regular basis and they're sent to all the geographical inspectors. So if you're saying, like everybody else, that you want copies of that, there's nothing sensitive in there at all.
No.
And again, going back to what I said about concentrating on threat, risk and harm and demand drivers, I think there's probably 2 or 3 areas of concern there, which is that Peak Ward document concentrates on. It doesn't cover all of the 24 wards in Torfaen, but the ones that is causing us demand and concerns.
I mean, they say information is king, and I've certainly found that. But if we had this information as members, I mean, we'd certainly be able to manage the expectation of our constituents, because obviously they come in and complain about this, that and the other. And if we were able to sort of throw a few figures at them, it might kind of manage their expectations somewhat. So, so any information on this, I think would be, members would really welcome it, to be honest.
Yeah, in addition to that, I know I showed Kate earlier, as part of the engagement, which is replacing Your Voice, I'm putting together a template at the moment, which will be shared with councillors, KINs and the community, which will focus purely on what the priorities are, list of surgeries, what our sort of volunteers, our mini police service, to those who are aware of that, cadets, our crime prevention panels, so the good that the volunteers are doing in the community, but also quarterly updates against all the priorities that we're concentrating on. It'll be bilingual, and they will be going out to all councillors then on a quarterly basis with an inspector's blog. So you'll be sort of at least have some understanding of what we're doing to tackle the issues in the area.
Lovely, thank you. Are there any other burning questions, members, or can we move on? So, yeah, Councillor Jones.
Just ask one other thing. In this time of austerity, and obviously it has, an impact on policing work, do you feel that you've got recourse to sort of say to the powers that be, how difficult it is, or do you feel that perhaps just new ways of reporting everything, it might get a bit lost?
No, absolutely. I think gone are the days where it's very much been an upward, downward sort of approach. I think we need to be mindful of the fact that if you're asking people to deliver on the front line, they're more often than not the ones with the best ideas. So on a monthly basis, we actually get feedback from our officers and our staff who are feeling those pressures and those issues, and contact through the community as to how best to go about and putting processes in place to improve the situation. So we're very much forward thinking and involving, very much like what we're looking to do with communities, but involving our staff at that front end in that process.
Are you in touch with anyone like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation or anything where they could be doing research into what's happening with the cuts? Do you get to feedback into anything like that we can look at in the future as to why things might not have been the way they should have been because of the cuts?
I know that obviously we, very much like yourselves, we pay academia to come in and review. We're think we've got a contract with the University of West England at the moment, who are coming in and looking at public confidence and satisfaction, to look how we can improve ways in which, to improve that as an example. And there's been countless others where we've been using University of Durham, for instance, to come in and do some other work as well. So absolutely, I think it's nice to have a fresh set of eyes to come in and look at it from a different perspective. Absolutely.
Thank you. And the last question is for Councillor Ashley.
Yeah, we've been involved with the Northville underpass thing because we've done a lot of work with you on that one. Are there more opportunities for that type of design work, which is this physical environment, to counteract antisocial behaviour and small-scale crime? Because that does seem an opportunity if we can get money just to counteract stuff like that. I know the other aspects of it are standard policing work, and maybe youth work as well. But that sort of project where we get the community together to do cohesive. I've got to do this very quickly too.
Sure. So I'll answer very quickly as well then. Obviously that initiative in itself was twofold really. Yeah. Part of it was capital funding, which I know that you were looking to look elsewhere for that. But the money that you're looking for the Commissioner's office was very much about engagement and involving the children and stuff like that. There are opportunities to do similar projects throughout Torfaen and indeed throughout Gwent. For those of you who don't know, we've got £300,000 per year to spend on sustainable projects of up to 3 years, anything upwards of £50,000 a year. So whereas before we used to spend relatively small amounts of money, we're looking at far bigger sustainable projects, but concentrating on children and young people.
Thank you for that. Members, I'm ending that part of the meeting now. But thank you very much, officers, for your attendance and the great communication. We will sum up and make our recommendations now, but thank you for, and I don't expect you to stay for this bit. Yeah. I don't expect you to stay for our, although I know some of you are coming back in. You are? Okay. Just a couple of minutes. It isn't going to be too long. Thank you. So members, it's formulating some recommendations. I think from my perspective, what I picked up was the tree description. That's
to be fair, I think it seems to be a work in progress anyway. So
absolutely. I didn't get an awful lot of recommendations out of this meeting.
Just the publication of this report.
Information sharing, and perhaps be kept in the loop with the new process. Although he did say he would be involved in. But that was the only answer. Yeah.
I suggest something else as well, because what they did make a big play of, and it needs to, is actually working. They're making a big play about working with local groups, local voluntary organisations, etc. That's something that they're making, that needs resources, even small. And why I asked that last question, because we spent 3 years working with that, and they made a big play about giving us 70 grand down in Northville. And there's a lot of work going on there. If they can do it in other areas of the borough, that is brilliant. And the PSB is making a thing about doing it in Blaenavon as well. So more of those practical outcome works to balance out what we're talking about. It's practical outcomes that are important. Recommendation is more of that type of work. He just said
actually, just to come in, it's not really a recommendation for this committee, because the funding is out of your control. That's funding that is cut.
What I'm saying is that the report from the PSB, right, we're talking about the report from PSB, where they see needs from the PSB to look at practical outcomes, funding need to be sought.
So we put a comment rather than a recommendation at the end that you support the work that is being taken place there and recommend that.
thanks so much for being finally letting to speak. I appreciate that, and I'd like to go through the chair when we do want to ask questions. Is it possible that we could make some sort of recommendation where councillors can be included more in these hubs in some way? And understand that 155, but if it's something at all, they could look at to get us more involved, I would appreciate that. So
Kate did mention perhaps if there are issues that arise in those meetings that may be applicable to certain members, that could perhaps be fed back to you when it's right.
But if they could look at some sort of mechanism to get us more involved.
Also, moving on from that, is the engagement and the feedback to residents, because I think there is a little bit of a lack in there. So maybe from a recommendation about the feedback that residents get, as well, our involvement and engagement, but residents as well. Maybe we should formulate a recommendation there.
We ask them see what results come from their working within the hub and their engagement with the community. Because there's got to be some positives come out of these.
System, isn't there?
Lyndon did mention that they will be part of some sort of external assessment of how it is working, so perhaps, but it's still in the early stages yet, so I think it might be further down the line maybe.
Can I make a comment? It's not just borough councillors, it's also community councillors not getting elected in here. It's actually elected representatives need a way in which to engage with this, and we don't have it either anyway.
I don't think anybody's said the difference between borough or community.
No. The point I'm making is, Dave's totally right. There's a lack of where elected representatives have an engagement with this system. Now, the trouble with PSB is it's one rep of it's very distant. Just like one rep, and it's how we rep into the system.
That's Councillor Thomas's and Councillor Haynes' point of feeding back to members.
And it was a point that was made the last time we scrutinised it.
Yeah, that's what Councillor Thomas and I have just said. It's engagement with councillors and the public. Councillors being borough, community, town, or all councillors. There's no difference in that for me. So it's councillors per se. Right then, members, you all happy with those recommendations? Nothing else? Thank you.
Sorry, can I just check as well then? Obviously the main scrutiny has to be, you are all satisfied with the progress that has been made against those recommendations to date?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lovely, yes. We shall move on to the next agenda item. Welcome back. We're on to agenda item 6, delivering the violence against women and domestic abuse and sexual violence strategy in Torfaen. So the purpose of this report is for the committee to consider how the Gwent VAW-DASV regional strategy will effectively meet local delivery in Torfaen and progress against each of the 6 priorities. Of course, welcome back, officers. If you'd like to give us a brief outline of the report so that we can... Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to give, again, a very brief overview of this. My colleague to my right has greater detail, but you'd recall last year that I raised this as part of the scrutiny process of elements in regards to the violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence strategy that in Gwent, again, has been approached as a regional concept and complying with the legislation within that. My colleague Rebecca leads that team on the Gwent approach. But what we've always said what's very important here, both with regards to community safety and with the VOWDSV strategy, is that although these are regional elements that we are working around, it has a local delivery, and we always bring it back to the local environment to ensure that members are always cited the fact that the local response is not forgotten, and that's why I would like to bring this report on a regular basis back to scrutiny. Your decision, how often you see it. But there are 6 priorities in there that's within the strategy. There's a delivery plan that helps with it. What I would say to members is this is still very much in its infancy, and it's developing as it grows forward. And I'm just going to hand over to Rebecca now to just give a very brief overview and to answer any questions from the group. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rebecca. So, am I on? Yeah,
you are.
Ready? Okay, thank you. My name is Rebecca Haycock. I'm the Regional Advisor for VOWDSV, Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence. We'll save a bit of time and refer to it as VOWDSV. I've been in post for nearly 4 years now, and during that time we've been the pilot region for delivering this regional approach to tackling the issues. It came about through the legislation, the VOWDSV Wales Act, which is the first across the UK. Very much for the first time, lots of work has always taken place. It's always been, big across individual organisations' agendas, but for the first time, public sector had an accountability that they then had to report on what they were doing. So this is fantastic that you're inviting me to answer questions on how we're doing, because that accountability is beginning to work, and this is exactly, we need to have the voice heard. So my role is very much strategic. We're not a service delivery function. We work closely with those services. We've set our 6 priorities that mirror the Welsh Government strategy. As the pilot region, so the new region, the tidy region, as is Gwent, we're very much testing out lots of new work. So we've been the first area to develop and roll out the Ask and Act early identification training, and that's been a huge piece of work. So 4 years, when I say it out loud, it sounds like a long time, but actually, in the scheme of how this is a brand new piece of legislation, and to have our strategy now published from May 2018 just puts it into context of how early on we still are, and what sort of slow work this can be. As Lyndon says, the report attempts to go through each of the 6 strategic priorities, which are broad, as you can see. That I've tried to address the specifics to Torfaen within those, and work closely with my Torfaen partners across each of those agendas, and work very closely with our regional buddies, if you like, so our safeguarding teams. So we're looking at how we can collaborate. We're already collaborating much, but how we can collaborate more fully with safeguarding partners, with area planning board partners, with supporting people partners. We're all working to the same end of supporting vulnerable groups of people. So there's lots of work going on with regards to governance. In terms of governance, we've got a reporting mechanism into the 5 public service boards, and we'll be doing that annually through since the publication of the strategy in May. The first formal reporting then will be next year, although we've started that already. In terms of individual organisations, exactly this, so the scrutiny through your organisation, and I'll be attending similar scrutinies across Newport and neighbouring local authorities. So happy to answer any questions if I can, and I'll probably turn to my police colleagues as well, who won't be prepared for it if there's any police questions.
Thank you very much. Members, I think I've got a question for you. Do we have a more, this is in relation to 2.8 on the agenda, do we have a more precise indication of when the measures or indicators will be released?
We have the draft indicators. They've been a long time coming, and they are out for consultation now, as of about 2 weeks ago. There's we've circulated those, and I'm happy to circulate them wider if
members of this committee want to see them, but they're on the Welsh Government website. What we're doing as a regional team is encouraging organisations to respond and also developing a regional response. So we've got a workshop planned in March, and we'll be submitting a response on behalf of the region. There'll be some detail that needs to sit with organisations. Much of those indicators will be looking at things like, police reporting, potentially calls to the helpline, numbers of trained staff. So.
Councillor Jones, you were the next question.
Yeah, I hope I can pronounce this properly, but whilst the action detailed throughout 3.1 sets out increased awareness of WADSV,
Fowler SV,
Fowler SV, to professional and network attendees, what about the wider public and the awareness of the wider public?
Yeah, so that's a really important question. We've got engagement communication work stream as part of this priority, and much of what's happened over the previous months is the development of a toolkit for engagement, and we've got participation officers, including from Torfaen, sitting on an expert panel and have developed how we've always referred to survivors or victims, but actually the approach that we've now developed is to refer to those who are affected. So could be any one of us, probably is all of us in some way, whether or not it's a family member, somebody we work with, etc. So how we communicate those messages is very early. We have, in terms of our team and our budget, we are punching above our weight, but we've got links within all corporate comms. We have a Twitter presence, and we are developing web pages on the Gwent Safeguarding website. Again, it's quite early days. There's detailed barriers and difficulties which we address then through the delivery plan and our reporting of that.
In agenda item, 3.2.1, it says to date 199 primary and secondary pupils have accessed the programme in Torfaen. Did this cover all of the schools in Torfaen? Is it for the schools to approach the programme leaders, or do they encourage access to the schools? Yeah.
Much of the legislation almost kind of lost its education focus. So when it was going through scrutiny in Welsh Government, there was a big section where what are we going to do about education, and the way it's worded in the Act is local authorities will be responsible for reporting on what they're doing with regards to with their education. So when we can see what that looks like, we'll have something that we can work with. What we've got currently is a working group, which is the safeguarding leads within each local authority, police liaison, as Jason was talking about the programme. Hafan Cymru isn't the only programme, but it's one that's funded by Welsh Government. Welsh Government ACES coordinators, and so we're looking at rolling out the whole school approach. So it's not so much how necessarily that particular programme is implemented through all the schools, but how that school then is able to report, and the indicators will assist us with that. Does that help?
Sorry, Jessica.
Yeah, sorry, just following on from that one. Don't tell me, children who aren't in school, so perhaps pupil referral units, or they're being homeschooled, and perhaps more suggestion than asking, because obviously early stages, but that we proactively look to engage them, especially because obviously, talking of horrible general statistical terms, they are perhaps more likely to experience problems. So engagement, I think quite a few of our homeschools are out on religious grounds, so engagement with churches, etc.
Good point, Jess. Yeah. I think I agree with Lyndon, really, a comment that you made earlier about keeping this topic high on the agenda. I'd like to see this followed through in future, future committees, because I think it's we don't value the work enough at the moment. I think it's very undervalued, and I'd like to see this followed through. So, members, Councillor Slade.
Yeah, very briefly. Page 39, point 3.3. Strategic Priority 3 talks about perpetrator services and the involvement of the third sector. Basically, could you tell me or describe who are these third sector providers, what work is taking place to bring or to hold perpetrators to account? There seems to be an emphasis here on what can I, modifying behaviour, but it's the old question, isn't it, about a balance between punishment and rehabilitation, and this seems to focus on the rehabilitation. Is there any sort of focus at all on the punishment side?
So again, the criminal justice processes that are in place, and where there is a conviction and an ability to link then an intervention to that end is it continues through our probation partners and the programmes that they run. In terms of the third sector, so more community-based interventions, there are programmes that are run in some but not all of our areas in Gwent, which are aligned to, embedded within children's social services, so that they have that cohort of families that they're working with. In terms of all of the others and more of that early intervention, and I'm somebody that is I think I'm a perpetrator. I want some support. I want to remember. All of that work is what's referred to really in terms of the third sector, and they also they take referrals from social services as well. That organisation for Gwent is Phoenix Domestic Abuse Service, and they operate within Blaenau Gwent, and they take referrals from across Gwent but at a cost, which is why there's a reference there to some funding that we're trying to scope to address that. In terms of how we know that what we're doing is effective, there's a huge piece of work which is being done within Welsh Government, and they've got a forensic psychologist who's led on that work, and again one of the pieces of work that's come to Gwent in terms of a report. What have we got, what does it look like, and how is it linking to any service standards and quality assurance. We have that, and they've recently published 3 documents, so a rapid assessment of what works, and this is available on the Welsh Government website. They've also published a service standards, and this is again across the whole of the agenda, so not just domestic abuse but sexual violence. So it's incredibly complicated, and it's been quite a long piece of work. Also, they've published a good practice guidance for our public service. So when we're working within housing, how do I deal with a perpetrator? And I guess just coming back to then all of the there are perpetrators of Vowed SV, but equally, if we're looking at things through that ACEs lens, what does that mean to kind of what's happened to them as well? Not that we take away that accountability, but kind of understanding it from that perspective. So it's, again, quite early days. But
just to add to that, the Wisdom Project, which has been up and running in Blaenau Gwent, where there's a dedicated team that deal with your high risk and your prolific perpetrators of domestic abuse. It's been successfully embedded up there, and that's something that's going to be rolled out throughout the force, and particularly in Torfaen. So, watch out really, that's going to be coming our way too as well. So you'll have a dedicated team looking at dedicated high risk domestic abuse perpetrators.
Yeah, just back to the point of the service standards and the QA. Now we have that, we can know where we would when commission services and what it needs to look like. So those that are already, developed, we've got something to work with in terms of commissioning.
Lovely, thank you. In 3.2.1, it mentions Welsh Government funded programme. How long is the funding for? Is it a dedicated? And if there is a risk of losing it, how are we going to
So for the healthy relationship work, there's always a risk of losing it, and we've got the difficulty of year-on-year funding. And I can't speak for this particular third sector organisation, but my understanding is that they don't know right up until the nail.
Councillor Ashley?
Yeah, what's the worry with all these things? You've just said it. Is that funding dependent year on year on Welsh Government funding, is it?
Yeah, I'm sure Lyndon's been at similar meetings.
Yeah, I'm frequently down Welsh Government around the funding programmes for a lot of this work, because it's one of PSSU's key activities. The core fact is no local authority in Gwent's got core funding to provide this services, so we are wholly reliant on grant both from the the Office of the Police Crime Commissioner, and Welsh Government. I can assure you I'm beating the drum as often as possible, because these are, in my view, vital services that we need to provide in order to support the various strategies coming out of Welsh Government. So I am expecting support from Welsh Government to continue with the activity, because that's really the source of funding we have.
Can I ask a further question? None of this comes out of any of our core social services funding or any core policing funding at all, then, any of it?
It doesn't from... The council does not fund any of this activity. That was a decision taken several years ago.
I think that much of the purpose of the Act is that it's embedded within the work that we're doing. So the training that is our training plans, the corporate training plans, that the VAUDRSV training is embedded within. That a lot of that for the schools, the well-being element of the new curriculum needs to be picking up this. So that the third sector have propped up the agenda for many years, and I think there still will be a need to go to those specialists, because teachers in the room will find having somebody that to contribute, and the same with the trainers. But the intentions of the Act are that this work is embedded within.
How much are we talking?
Next question.
I haven't got the figures to hand, really. I mean, yes, because that's part of the funding arrangement. Are you talking about the funding arrangements around the VAUDRSV team? Or can you be a little bit more specific what you're looking for?
Yeah, no,
it's quite a complex area. And
I appreciate that, but it illustrates what the work we're looking at. Yeah. And I don't know. I'm thinking all of it. It sounds alarming. Essential work like this, it would be useful to know how much it costs.
But if I can just take us back a little bit further as well, we used to have an IDVA service, which is Independent Domestic Violence Advocate Service, where we have one member of staff. Yeah. That was co-funded from the OPCC. Yeah. It was a want to work on regional activities, so what funding used to come to Torfaen as part of that is now part of the regional strategy through the Office of the Police Crime Commissioner. And that's a far better use of those resources, because what we've got now is consistency and capacity in that area of service. What Rebecca is working through is those strategic recommendations. We are looking to embed in existing custom and practice that we've got. So with our members of staff, that's part of the corporate training package that Rebecca mentioned. We have a close relationship with our schools. Schools are fundamental to this whole process in quite a lot of things, but schools, those of you that are governors, it's very difficult sometimes to get topics on the agenda because the curriculum is so heavy. What this strategy does, and what the Priorities help us do, is to coordinate things better on a regional footprint. We've reduced duplication, but we are not ticking boxes, we're actively making sure that we are hitting in the right areas, and we are wholly reliant on the grant funding to be able to do that.
Thank you for that. At 3.5.2, it mentions that 3,000 staff have accessed training. So does that include teachers and school staff? And how often are we regularly reviewing that training? And I'm mindful of sort of staff turnovers and stuff.
So the 3,000 figure refers to Group 1, where there's a requirement for all staff to have accessed. It's mostly delivered within an e-learning package, and schools have accessed, although there's been difficulties where they haven't got a .gov.
Yes.
So there's a lot of technical detail. There's also a face-to-face version that within Gwent we've developed, which has got a great added value in terms of discussions in the room and disclosures equally. So that 3,000 refers to all staff, which is the bottom tier, and it's that everybody's got an awareness and knows that there's a referral route in, and that there are others within their organisation that know a little bit more. And then the next level of Group 2 and 3 are those in much more front-facing roles. Now, the figures for Torvine, I do have, and many of those are education. So Torvine, quite uniquely, have delivered to 30 head teachers and designated leads. So, and they're still working, where does this need to sit? So within primary school, that's usually quite straightforward. That's the head teacher or the deputy head. Within high schools, it's much more complicated. And we are, we've got every area has every individual local authority area has had to submit a training plan, and that's a requirement under the Act. We're feeling our way with those areas with a training subgroup forum to actually work out, right, what should those priority groups be, and how's that rollout going. And annually we report that into Welsh Government under the Act.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Jones.
Could I just ask what the training entails? Is it about signs of domestic violence within children and their behaviours and things, or is it more about who to contact and how to do it and, how to support?
So the Ask and Act training is very much around spotting key indicators. They're about spotting key indicators, but knowing that some of those won't necessarily mean that there's violence and abuse happening, but that it's okay to ask about it, because evidence says that if somebody had just asked, I could have talked. Now, how that addresses children and young people is a really important point, and the way that it, and this is the approach of the training is that it rather than, as in the past, it was multi-agency, you'd come from various backgrounds to come and have an awareness training. This is very much bespoke to your specific role. So those teachers will be working out with their teams, what the pathways, and who is that non-abusive, supportive, identified parent, and who's got the authority, which is why it would be the designated safeguarding lead to then look at what how to approach and how to ask. It's quite complicated within schools. It's potentially much more straightforward, for example, within housing, where you've got a housing officer that might go out and want to ask a question.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, I think yours is the next question anyway.
Seem to be going on about this a bit much, but what impact do you think cuts in policing have had on implementing these recommendations and actions?
The cuts in policing, I don't know if I should pass over to James on that score.
Not a great deal, I'll be honest. It falls very much within vulnerability. Vulnerability, as I said earlier, is discussed on a daily basis as part of our DMMs. So not only do we expect sergeants and inspectors to look at domestic abuse incidents over the last 24 hours, but also expect to be asked questions around safeguarding, around positive action, to ensure that the necessary referrals have gone in. We have on average anything between 35 and 40 reported domestic abuse incidents in Gwent, not Torfaen. So each section, Torfaen is in fact, not probably, it is the busiest section for crime in the force, for volume, and that's obviously mirrored with domestic abuse incidents as well. But everybody is held to account on a day-to-day basis. And the beauty then is that if you've got repeat victims or repeat perpetrators, or again they're graded as well, so standard, medium or high risk. Your high risk are obviously a key consideration and will become a priority arrest. What we've also done in the west of Gwent as well, which covers Torfaen, is back last year we took the decision as a senior management team to create a bespoke domestic abuse investigation unit, which is based out of Risca. So fundamentally, and that is composed with detectives and uniformed staff. So they deal with the more risk type incidents, but also give inputs then to those more standard type abuse as well. So going back to your original question, cuts hasn't necessarily affected us. If anything, it's made us more target those sort of vulnerable sort of areas, which domestic abuse is certainly one of those.
Can I just say, I'm pleased you said that, because it's always been quite a hidden problem, isn't it? And in the past, I know that, not Gwent particularly, but right across the country, police haven't always acted in a way perhaps that they should have done, and perhaps ignored some cries for help of some people. So it's good to hear that now you're much more targeted. Do you still see it as a bit of an iceberg, you know, that you've got the surface and there's a lot of it going on hidden that perhaps you're not, you know, seeing at all?
Absolutely, but I don't think it just relates and refers to domestic abuse. We talk about CSE, you know, modern day slavery. They're all hidden crimes, and we talk about the advent of online, you know, frauds and stuff like that. There's a lot that goes on that we don't know about, and certainly the Commissioner has invested and will continue to invest heavily in those types of incidents or those crime types to ensure that we sort of get a firmer understanding. But with that, we also need to increase, I think, people's confidence in coming forward as well. So absolutely, tip of the iceberg. We're a long way from getting there, but certainly we're going in the right direction, I believe.
Thank you. And just to add to that, some of the initiatives that Gwent Police have picked up with going out as first responders with specialists. So there's a lottery-funded project that then that specialist can be there to assist in the risk assessment and consent to share information for support services, and that's you know, to be evaluated, but I would guess will increase referrals very much. And I think, you know, it's one of those that we want to see it increase, and then we know that we're people are seeking the help. So it's an interesting one.
And I think what's reassuring is that the confidence from the surveys that we conduct with victims of domestic abuse, their victim satisfaction confidence levels are in the high 90%, are far more higher in the quality of service they get from the police than perhaps victims of other crime types. And I think that's mainly because of the nature of it and the amount of expertise perhaps is applied to that and the time.
Just to, you know, and I realise it's not exactly specific to your question, but some of the things that are falling down for survivors and victims are, yes, we hear about how the police have done, but it's more so around family courts and the criminal court process. So these are the bits that we need to be really focusing on, and I think it's a frustration for our police colleagues as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just following on from what you've just said, really, because obviously the Act covers such a wide thing, even though we were mostly talking about domestic violence. Obviously, you know, you've got financial abuse, all sorts of things. You know, how do you sort of reconcile that? Do you think we're giving enough attention, I suppose, to each aspect of the Act, or, you know, because you've only got limited time, limited resources?
I would say probably not. Everybody by default goes to domestic abuse, because it's come a long way in terms of understanding, which is a great thing. But the other forms of violence against women, FGM, forced marriage, how they need to be understood differently. Equally, sexual violence, both within that intimate relationship and from a stranger, it's less talked about, always has been. Equally within the domestic abuse world, it's the thing that we don't talk about. So we, throughout the delivery plan, we have a focus of looking across the whole agenda, and it's that concerted effort to make sure that we're doing so. We've had a focus through some of the practitioner events, and we've got a conference specifically on sexual violence now next month, with that in mind.
Councillor Jones.
I think initiatives and programmes organisations have a very good way of working through their funding streams and making what they know their service users need fit with the funding streams and the criteria for those. So a lot of the work around that the Welsh Government are doing around sustainable funding is trying to address that. So opening up some of that supporting people funding so that it's not restricted just to supporting a tenancy or to a specific age group. So in terms, I think there's a very sort of active sector that think outside of the box, but that doesn't. But I think the cuts come because no funding is ever increased, so even, there's no, and just back to the previous point, our aim is to increase support and to increase reporting and disclosures, but there's no increase for the services, so we're always running a cut in that sense.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Evans.
We wouldn't have that as part of this remit. That would be something that the operational arm of the various domestic abuse support services we have would be a part of that. It's not like children's services where we have a corporate parenting duty to those children and would place them in an area that's of safety. This is a different gender element. I don't think we send families out of area. What families do is, if there are domestic abuse instances and they go to a support provider, there may be a vacancy in a different area to enable that support to take place.
Could I just add, the police would have figures on those vulnerable families though, wouldn't you? Because wouldn't you have to protect them in some way?
The supporting people, the funders of the refuge projects would know that. I guess it's understanding what we'd be looking for in that data, because there's a drive towards people being able to remain in their own home and many safety packages put around that. There's a drive for people, not necessarily accessing refuge, which is what we're talking about. And there's, for some people, the need and the choice to go out of the area is a good thing. For others, it's because there's no space and it's the worst thing and it's lost all their contacts. So it's understanding what that, accessing the data is one thing, but understanding the story behind each of it would be another.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Ashley.
This is a general one, Rebecca. What's the perspective in the roundabout authorities in terms of this problem? We sort of asked, so very sort of scrutiny type question is, what's the picture like in neighbouring authorities?
So the picture of incidents, we could look to, so I've got, there's many ways to look at it, but, for example, I've got MARAC data in front of me. MARAC is the process by which the highest risk, so those that have scored high on that risk assessment, are the cases are heard and a safety plan's put in place. The numbers are dependent upon population, and so as you would expect, Newport have the highest numbers, Caerphilly are next, Blaenau Gwent coming in next. Torvine and then Monmouthshire. But I mean, that's just a snapshot, and that's reliant upon a process which, as you know from the report, is equally being reviewed and looked at and making sure that that's running as it should.
Thank you.
That's one example.
Councillor Thomas. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. This strategy addresses violence against women, but what I wanted to ask was, are we addressing the rise of violence against men? Before anyone starts getting panicky, it's not me. But it is important, because I think there is a rise on domestic violence against men, and I'd just like to do some commentary on that, please.
I think it's understanding data as well, and any rises, I hope that there is, because it means that male victims are feeling able to come forward, and they have, other barriers that they face in terms of, understanding around masculinity and what that means to be afraid of somebody that you're in a relationship with. So the strategy addresses all forms of domestic abuse. The term violence against women is used to refer to the types of violence whereby a woman is more predisposed to experience. So some of that will be domestic abuse, and others will be types of violence that men wouldn't experience. We understand that, we are committed to a priority that is to look at gender responsive services, and that's a really important term, because what it means is that the service that is developed and offered to males needs to be responsive to what their needs are, and we don't fully understand what that looks like, because we haven't had, through all our consultations, we haven't had the opportunity to speak to enough males. So we are in the middle of a consultation. We've had, because this is not a new concern. It's one that, it's like with anything. It's those minority groups that you need to not lose sight of, and what do services need to look like. So we have survey data which we're currently analysing, and we're working closely with Cardiff, who are doing a similar piece of work, and they're actually in a place where they're looking at commissioning a service specifically for men. And so what we'll do, the next stage of our research is, based on the responses we've had, we'll be holding a focus group with those males. Again, referring back to our expert panel, are we doing it as we need to? Who haven't we gone to? Not just going to the services where males have accessed, because they've already found, so we're interested, but they've already found support. But the services where male victims will be, but they haven't necessarily accessed, and we've been able to reach some of those through some of the, for example, there's a Dad's Can project, a Men's Sheds project, those, such like.
That's good to hear. I think yours is the next question as well.
Sorry, Chair. I lost my place then. Are there any recommendations that have not been fully actioned as they should be? If so, are there barrier issues?
I think there are many barriers. We've got issues with regards to training, and we've got training dates that we need more members of a local authority and health to be nominated onto, so that's an immediate risk. I mean, I've got my my colleagues that in each area that I go to and address barriers as we face them. In terms of the barriers around funding, that's a constant, and it's a constant difficult sort of non-response, because you're cutting social workers, and we're looking to increase the IDFA funding. It's really difficult. Our reporting up to the board and exception reporting that way highlights the kind of key barriers that we want addressing. So that board meets quarterly.
Does that answer your question as well, Alan? Gaps in provision?
Well, thank you, Chair. What I was going to say is the service obviously casts quite a wide net, doesn't it? And you've already kind of intimated that you don't fully understand some of the issues surrounding the domestic violence where males are involved. Have you identified any other perhaps areas where you kind of two, there may be gaps that you're not addressing. I don't mean, as, in a negative way. I think we can learn from our weaknesses as much as we can from our strengths. So.
I think certainly the older people population is a really important group, and there you're working with changes in attitudes over a lifetime. We can do all the kind of tweeting and multimedia awareness raising, and the images don't always look like you would somebody might not identify with in terms of posters up. So that's an area that needs real attention, and just kind of go into the DHR, so the domestic homicide reviews that are commissioned where there's been a homicide within a relationship. There's a significant percentage of those that are from the older population. Sir Ashley.
I've in a former life was person that worked with people with Alzheimer's, and one of the real problems is once you get to that stage and the other forms of dementia that where it's a real problem. I just wonder where you've been picking that up.
I just sort of, because that's interesting element in regards to the actual voter board and the work that Rebecca's involved in. We've got subgroups around elements that are looking at training aspects of each of those key priorities. So in terms of looking at the additional vulnerable groups that both yourself and Councillor Slater are identifying, we've received feedback from that at the board level. I sit on the board for the Chief Executive. Those issues are on the agenda, but it's always helpful to have yourselves as scrutinising, considering those areas, because that helps us also thinking, who've we not quite captured?
You come back in that one of the markers of some forms of dementia is the lack of inhibition, i.e. violence, and it doesn't matter which gender. It's something that comes up and it can be reported.
Jessica.
Yeah, just obviously we've been talking about sort of the public sector because we're all working together, and the third sector, but just around especially the awareness level around the private sector, because obviously we're talking, say, an older population, putting information in places they're going to be using. So talking about buses, post offices, banks, places where they're going regularly. I know that money's not in abundance, but what work are we doing to engage with private business to get those folks up, to get their staff trained, etc.?
So we've got our work cut out with the public sector, but there are great initiatives and some supermarkets that have been on board that our third sector partners have worked closely with, and they've got in fact they've inspired much of the workplace policy work. So taking somebody off the till for a period of time. I'm not sure that that's exactly answering your question. I think we've got a lot to learn from them, and we've got a lot to roll out in terms of, for example, workplace policies and awareness raising. And some of the bigger organisations are on board. That that as you would expect, organisations like Admiralty, some of the key supermarkets, Asda is very good. Probably not enough, but what we have key events through a calendar of activities throughout the year, and in terms of targeting older people, we have planned events at supermarkets with stands and people, and trying to have the merchandise that we use be identifiable for the people, and that's a target. So we'll look at, there's an older person's day, for example, and we'll use that day, and that's much of the engagement communication work. We'll look at that.
Councillor Jones. I just wondered, do we have any figures if there have been any deaths in the last few years in Torfaen through domestic violence?
I can answer in terms of deaths now, and if we looked at the domestic homicide review process, which isn't an accurate way of looking at deaths, because we might not recognise it as domestic abuse, therefore it wouldn't reach that point. But for Torfaen, there's been 3 deaths, and that was one incident, if you like, and the ONS collate data on homicide, and they between April 13 and March 16, there's been across the UK there's been 454 domestic homicides. And they break that down into male and female, and it's significantly female deaths.
Councillor Slade, I think.
Thank you, Chair. It's not a question really, it's just a reassurance that although, I'm speaking personally, although I'm kind of asking about minority groups that perhaps you're dealing with, I am fully aware that the main focus, rightly so, is on women. Really, and that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Councillor Ashley.
I was going to ask, the other thing that I'm very well aware of, as I just brought the Alzheimer's thing up, was whether carer abuse actually, because there's quite detailed stuff on that, whether that's considered, because some of that is also included, and there's some quite horrific, I'm not sure locally, but that's been well documented.
It's really complicated, because I guess it's, how are we defining abuse and what somebody is living with, are they afraid, and, is it something that's happening constantly, and whether or not that's from a change in behaviour because of an illness, it doesn't make any, it is still incredibly sad, potentially dangerous for the person living with it. So I think that the support still needs to be very much kind of person-focused, and what is it that they want, and what are their options, and what is the help that's around. And the Welsh Government they've published guidance on older people and domestic abuse, and they've got a section looking specifically at dementia and carers, and how carer abuse, both in terms of what the carer is experiencing, but equally the other way.
That's true. It's not just older people on that one, because those of us that have to care for younger people, not children I'm talking about, this is adult children, but I'm wondering what Jason's reflection on that one. I'm sorry, I'm not going off piste here, because this could involve a lot of women in this one. So I wondered how what Jason's reflection on that as well.
What was the question again?
About carer abuse. Yeah, because it's a lot of women that do it.
It is.
The main.
But I think somebody mentioned earlier, the sort of tip of the iceberg. A lot of these incidents aren't necessarily reported. But there are mechanisms in place through our sort of public protection units to obviously, once that's done, necessary sort of strats are then put in place through partners to actually explore those in more detail. Personal experience, we don't tend to get a great deal through, and they're certainly not discussed on a day-to-day basis on our DMN document. So that's not to say that things aren't happening out there, but in terms of the recording mechanisms, we're not getting that volume through the system.
And Councillor Evans.
How will we test that these actions are working in Torfaen and having a positive impact? So, are all these actions we're doing, are they having a positive impact? And
it's like I can start that, because of course we get progress reports to the board on what the Valdry SV team are doing, and considering they've been at this very short period of time, it is having a positive impact, because the profile is far higher now than it was previously. We've got 3,000 staff that have accessed the online tool here and done the training. So just locally we are seeing that the fact that this is no longer a taboo subject, right, that can be discussed. And someone mentioned earlier that it's a subject area that perhaps didn't have the profile that it's had previously. I think Rebecca and the team, and in fairness to Welsh Government, they focused activity on this across the piece. In terms of local impact, what I said at the very start of this meeting was, we're early into the strategy. I think we've got a little bit of time to look and perhaps to discuss, certainly at the board level, what exactly performance measures we want to put in place, and also, but look at that. I'm always conscious of the fact that it's okay to have the performance data at a regional level, but I want to know what it's like locally as well. So what the impact and benefit to Torfaen as well. So I know it doesn't really answer your question in full, but I do think we're at rather early days. Our chief executive is very keen. Believe he's very keen that we fulfil a full part of the Vowdr SV board, and we do that on your behalf.
I think it's understanding what a positive outcome looks like for those experiencing. So we might say, so many arrests or so many convictions through the court, but what does that process actually look like to the person travelling through it? And so I guess, I don't know how we'll measure that, but we'll make sure that it's embedded with it, in terms of going back and asking how it is for survivors and those affected.
I suppose for me as a board member, the numbers are not as important as what is the outcome to me.
And I guess how you make sure that process is good and effective for that person is through training and awareness raising, so we can count the training and target the training and have those training plans.
I think from a police perspective, when we introduced the domestic abuse unit summer of last year, we want to concentrate on the quality of investigation, because by mere virtue of improving the quality of the investigation, you'll then, by the nature of it, get a better positive outcome. So I know for a fact that there's been a big increase in positive outcomes in the west of Gwent, and which obviously includes Torfaen as well, by concentrating on the quality of the investigation. So, I'm sort of confident that we are going in the right way, because it's not necessarily about bean counting and getting, as you said, detections and cautions and stuff like that. It's about the quality of the investigation, and sometimes that means more the updates and that constant contact between the officer in the case and the victim probably sometimes means more to that victim than the actual outcome itself.
Yeah.
So I'm confident we're getting that right, and by the very nature, the outcomes are coming as well.
Yeah, there's a big piece of research through the Bristol University on justice, and that's exactly the findings. It's like a 5-year project, and that's exactly the findings. It's not the end, it's what happened and the contact throughout. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay. Thank you. I think we've come on and talking sort of my history 40 years ago. When my mother was involved in women's aid, things have evolved, and people are feeling more able to talk and discuss and divulge what's happening to them. So, I mean, for me, this is a positive step. I know we all absolutely hate having to have all of these because it means that there's a problem. But we are where we are. It's a good thing for me that people are starting to be able to talk more and more, because it's very different to 40 years ago now, and that needs to be applauded, really, that we've come on and accepted that. Anyway, thank you for attending, and for all your input and our questions, dealing with those quite rigorously and effectively. Members, we will then now go on to formulating our recommendations again. But thank you very much all for attending. Right, thank you, members. I'll just remind you of what our scrutiny activity is.
The Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee are invited to consider how the Gwent VAWD ASW regional strategy will effectively meet local delivery in Torfaen, comment on progress against each of the 6 priorities that are being delivered in Torfaen, and make recommendations to the Executive Member for Communities, Housing and Anti-Poverty and the Head of PSSU on any areas for further development and improvement. I know that I only actually picked up one recommendation in our discussions, and that was about engaging with children outside of the school process, so that those that generally, like you said, Jess, they are not in school because they are possibly going through things that they shouldn't be at such a young age. Absolutely. That's the only recommendation. So did anybody else pick up anything else? Councillor Jones?
I just think a need for keeping in mind that we need lots of partnership working in this, and also advertising. That there is a problem out there, and that there are people who are working with this problem. I don't know how we go about that, if we've got the money to go about that, but I think getting it out there would be great for people to know that the WAVSD, whatever it's called,
Ashley,
sorry, it was the money. That's what really worried me, to be honest. Consistent funding.
The issue, could we recommend it? How important this work is for the lack of continual funding? That's what I would do.
I think we'd have to put that more as a comment rather than a recommendation, but express your concerns.
Mine was just following on from Faye's comments about private business, but we do have quite good relationships with some sectors already, transport, etc., and we could be asking them to, put a poster up even, some small things, but just raising awareness.
With it, but that bit about domestic violence and other, he brought it up, I thought somebody brought it up nicely about the domestic violence is mainly women, but it's not necessarily male on. It could be the caring role of older people. I know I went into that.
It's all sorts of things.
It's all sorts of things, isn't it? It needs to be brought open to people out there that it's not just male and female. But you put that up beautifully, I thought. Yeah, because it just struck me there.
That's where you're going, where you're trying to bring in more people.
Yeah, carers. I was really thinking about older people with somebody dementia clock somebody, and I remember a case years ago where somebody was reported for domestic violence, and they were actually somebody with dementia. It was appalling, What's you down there?
Yeah, so just add this recommendation I had then, from what Stuart said, that if we target our engagement with other sectors, other businesses, to what, because obviously the Act is huge, but if you ask a bank to put stuff up about financial abuse, you ask, do you know what I mean? We actually proactively target,
Say is such a huge topic, and there's so many ways of covering it, that should we make a recommendation that maybe education, social services and the police work on this, because parenting programmes buy into this, because looking at parenting with empathy and how to support one another, that will help negate domestic violence. So I think it's really important, because I think people sometimes work in silos, and even when there's these boards, it doesn't always disseminate down to the other parts of those organisations. So perhaps for us to make that recommendation, if it is happening, great, but at least we got it there.
Everything, members, So, the date and the time of the next meeting, it's on the 13th of March 2019, and we'll be looking at parking enforcement. I quite welcome this one coming back on me, because it's something that we've already scrutinised partly before, but civil parking enforcement is coming, and I think it's going to be a really good topic for us. I'll hand over to you, Becky, because I know that
Sorry, members, I appreciate it's short notice that you see in this pro forma. Obviously, this was selected by you at Visioning back in June as civil parking enforcement, but also it's very timely at the moment due to a Cabinet member decision on environmental enforcement. So with your permission, we'll combine those two into the one report if you're minded to do so. So obviously I'll have to amend that pro forma based on the inclusion of environmental enforcement. I'll email that out to you this week. If you could then get back to me with any comments you have on anything specific you want included in that report, and also on any potential invitees you would like to have at the next meeting. Thank you.
So basically that just leaves me to thank you all for attending. Thank you for your input. Wonderful again. And I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.